Hello po. Mic test. Mic test.
Okay na lahat? Okay na lahat? Or di okay na?
Mic test. Hello?
Okay na? Okay na?
Hello, can you hear me? Hello?
Sige na.
President Rodrigo Duterte has approved the extension of the enhanced community quarantine in place over Luzon all the way to April 30. This comes amid calls from various quarters to build on progress from the first weeks of the ECQ to curb COVID-19 infection rates. What can we do for our part to win the war against this viral menace? Let's discuss in this episode of The Chiefs. Welcome to this special edition of The Chiefs. I'm Robbie Alampay. Nandito po ako sa Tierra Pura sa Quezon City, and I'm also joined in this special episode by our colleague na matagal ko nang hindi nakikita, Editor-in-Chief of the Philippine Star, Ami Pamintuan. Ami, kamusta ka? Nasaan ka?
Good to see you. Good to see you on quarantine.
Parang nasa opisina ka, nasa Maynila ka?
Sa office, tuloy-tuloy ang pasok namin. Meron lang social distancing, of course. Everybody's required to wear masks. Saka hindi lahat ng tao pinapapasok sabay-sabay to make social distancing possible. Even during the meetings, hiwa-hiwalay kami.
Okay, that's good to know. Now, joining us in our discussion are Doctors Jason Ligot and Albert Domingo. Dr. Ligot is a health communication specialist and director at Organic Intelligence. Meanwhile, Dr. Domingo is an independent health systems and public policy consultant. Doctors Domingo and Ligot, welcome to the Chiefs.
Hello, Robbie. Hello, Amy.
Good Hi, Robbie. Hi, Amy.
Hi, why?
Okay, now these special quarantine episodes of the Chiefs are much shorter, so we'll dive straight into it. We invited you because you've started this discussion along with your organization on community-based management of COVID. Ngayong inextend na ang quarantine and people are wondering anong mangyayari sa atin ngayon. either one of you, Dr. Domingo, siguro I'll start with you. What does that mean for us? What is community-based management of COVID-19?
Right. So, Robbie, whenever we say community-based management, from the words themselves, dapat sa community ginagawa yung pag-alaga sa COVID patient. This makes us wonder, di ba yung mga naririnig natin na COVID patients, yung mga usually critical, pag sinabi nating frontliner, naiisip natin yung mga doktor sa loob ng ospital, tama naman yun, frontliners sila. Pero meron din kasing iba pang frontline. Actually, yung sa ospital, last line na yon. Yung community, yun talaga yung first line of defense. Pahile-hilera yan eh. So when we say community-based management, we're looking at handling the patients who have mild symptoms, yung mga lagnat lang, fever, a little cough maybe, sore throat, no difficulty of breathing, no severe symptoms. They can actually be managed in facilities nearer to their houses, typically within the barangay or even the city or the municipality. Yun yung community-based management na sinasabi natin.
Now, for the public health system, why is it important to bring this discussion to the forefront? Bakit mahalagang pag-usapan natin ang community-based intervention?
Importante yung community-based intervention kasi the reality is, why did we extend the lockdown or the enhanced community quarantine? Di ba naririnig natin yung sinasabi, let's flatten the curve. Ano ba yung curve na sinasabi? Hindi yun yung curve ng mga katawan natin, yun yung curve na epidemic curve na sinasabi or the trend in the number of new cases per day. To begin with, we're not yet seeing the peak. Okay, the epidemiologists are still gathering data. It's too early to say that we have flattened the curve. Bakit ba kasi flatten? Pag masyadong mabilis yung pagtaas ng dami ng pasyente, hindi sila kakayanin ng mga ospital kasi mawawalan ng kama. Kung karamihan sa kanila ay severe, yung mga naghihingalo, mawawalan tayo ng mga ventilators. In fact, everyone says we don't want to be like Italy, where they have to decide who gets a ventilator and who does not kasi kulang talaga yung ventilators. So para mangyari yon, we have to lock down and stay inside their houses. But it doesn't mean that the virus is going to go away. It will be around for some time hanggang magkaroon tayo ng bakuna o kaya ng treatment. Habang nangyayari yon, ayaw natin magdagsaan lahat sa ospital para hindi naman ma-overwhelm yung mga ospital at saka yung mga doctor, nurse, at mga ibang hospital staff. So by doing the management at the community level of the easier cases, yung mga mild, we prevent the system from collapsing. Hindi tayo masyadong madadamihan ng pasyente sa mga ospital.
Dr. Domingo, question lang You mentioned that we have not yet reached the peak. Ang sinasabi ng gobyerno kaya daw tumataas ang cases ngayon is because more tests are being conducted. But you are saying na hindi pa natin nare-reach yung peak. Anong basis nyo for saying that?
Right. Tama naman yung sinabi ng ating DOH, ng Philippine government na kaya biglang nag-spike, biglang tumalon. Kasi 'di ba for a few days ago, siguro mga in the tens lang, mga 50 new cases, 60 new cases. Biglang nagkaroon ng araw na hundreds yung pagdagdag, 200 cases plus ganyan. So para bang bakit biglang tumaas? Tama po yun dahil ang DOH ay talagang nag-improve ng testing capacity. Mas maraming tao yung natetest ngayon on a daily basis. Pero para masabi kasi natin na nag-flatten, kailangan tignan natin yung numbers. Kung pinaplot yan sa isang graph, yung linya nakikita natin tumataas pa rin. So there will be an acceptable number of days na maaaring i-explain siya na dahil lang sa dumami yung tests. Pero after a few days, hindi mo na masasabing dahil lang sa improved testing yun eh. Baka nakikita mo na, lalo na pag wala ng backlog, pag wala ng backlog yung mga laboratories at yung pumapasok na resulta, rather yung lumalabas na resulta is almost real time, yung galing talaga sa pasyente, yun na yung malalaman natin, are we at the peak or not? And when we say peak, dapat mapapansin natin for a number of days na either nag-steady na yung pagtaas or bumababa na. Hindi pa natin nakikita yung trend na yun.
And that will be the peak, sinasabi mo. Ang sabi ng government, they can eventually test from 8,000 to 10,000 people a day. Kung gano'n na mangyayari, how many days will it take for us to be able to determine the peak?
I can't give the exact number of days kasi it depends really on a lot of assumptions. But to give you an idea, when the government reports on the number of tests, I've been paying careful attention to how they count it. I think they're counting the number of laboratory procedures that they are doing. So each particular patient can have maybe two tests, one on initial diagnosis or screening, and then another kapag siya ay, kaya sasabihin ng doktor niya, mukhang gumagaling na, ite-testing uli yun. Pag hindi pa happy yung doktor, tapos kailangan ng isa pang repeat test, so test number 3 na yon. Pero isang tao lang pinag-uusapan natin. So when the government says they're doing 8,000 to 10,000 tests, that's the number of tests. Siguro a little lower yung number of people. We need to find out kung yung backlog ay naubos na at yung lumalabas na results ay para bang yun na talaga yung actual patients na nakapila. And that's the only time we can say na our data is accurate.
Okay, now Dr. Domingo, I'd like to bring in Dr. Jason Ligot. Dr. Ligot, itong mga binabanggit ni Dr. Domingo, that numbers and tataas pa, it just reinforces his point earlier on na habang dumadami yung numero, there's a big question for all of us. Ano bang gagawin natin? Dadagsa ba tayong lahat sa ospital? At the same time, there's that message na wag niyo pong i-overwhelm ang public health system natin. Now, going back to our topic on community-based management, it raises a crucial question. Are our communities on the barangay level, for example, are they already equipped? And do they already have the capacity, whether it's resource or human resource, to actually deal with it on a barangay and community level?
Right, that's a good question to ask, Robbie. No? But before I answer that, I think it's helpful to clarify two related but different concepts, which is quarantine and isolation. So when we say quarantine, what we're doing is we're restricting the movement of a group of people who may have been exposed to see whether or not they develop symptoms. Isolation, on the other hand, is we're separating patients who are sick from those who are healthy or not sick. And you can only get to isolation, obviously, when you're able to test at a certain capacity, which is why a lot of discussion and emphasis has been around whether or not we're testing enough. And in due fairness to the government, they are increasing the testing capacity day by day. And by doing so, we are making an invisible enemy visible. And it's only then that we're able to move to the next phase of the response, which is isolation. And in that respect, the roles of the community is very, very important for two reasons. Number one, a lot of these strategies are anchored on whether or not people will follow government advice or appropriate health-seeking behavior. And the community has a big role in encouraging the appropriate health-seeking behavior, in making sure that messages reach their intended audiences and that those audiences follow the advice. Number two, as Albert mentioned earlier, what this quarantine actually does is it buys us time. Time to do what? Time to be better prepared, to be better equipped, to increase our testing capacity, to build the capacity of our hospitals, health centers, etc. And so, in doing so, by the next phase of the response, that's very important to take note. No, we're not looking at a few weeks. This is going to be a long, protracted battle. And in such a long, protracted battle, those communities will really play increasingly important roles.
Okay, so anong itsura nun? What will that look like? Let's say I presume here when you say community-based, we're talking on the level of barangays, no, or maybe even sitios. So what does it look like for us? Let's say our barangay says, "Oh, kami, we're all in on this community-based thing." What does that mean?
Well, in the first instance, it means that the community itself should be prepared. In what I mean by that is that the community should be able to self-police. For example, if somebody in the community develops symptoms, that they know where to go, that they know what to do. And if it's possible to manage it at the primary care level, not necessarily refer up to the hospital. And by primary care, this could mean a health center, for example, or a temporary facility that's set up specifically for this purpose. Then that decreases the pressure on the health system or on the hospitals, which is what we're seeing right now.
Dr. Ligot, I'd like
Yes,
to ask, we talked to you before the quarantine started.
Yes.
From what you've seen, how do you assess the government's response in the first maybe 3 weeks of the crisis?
I think we have to look at the balanced view. On the one hand, there were a lot of challenges in the first few days of the quarantine. There was a lot of confusion in terms of how the extreme quarantine measures would be implemented, whether or not you could go to work, how would you even go to work, for example, public transportation, all of the borders and all of that. And I think what has become increasingly clear is also the important role of local government. We've seen some cities, for example, outperform others because they've had very proactive local government leaders who had a plan or knew, at the very least, knew how to respond very quickly and mobilize resources. I think so. I would give credit to those local government officials who, at the onset, were able to really organize and mobilize the resources very quickly. From a national perspective, I think we have to understand that government is not just one entity. So when people complain about government, we assume that it's one big agency, but actually it's not. It's several different agencies trying to work together as one. And there are a lot of, I would say, good signs or more positive signs in the last few days where you see government really trying to work together. A good example, for example, related to this topic is the construction of mega facilities for isolation that is being led by the Department of Public Works and Highways. What they're essentially doing is they're retrofitting big venues like the PICC and World Trade Center to augment the capacity of the health system to deal with more mild or moderate cases. So I would say as a whole, yes, there were challenges for sure, but you would expect that in such a big undertaking. And it's also what we're seeing in other countries anyway. But over time, it looks like I think the government response is getting better. And right now, I think for us, our role as citizens is to one, pay attention. Obviously, we have to know and follow what government is saying or asking us to do. But at the same time, we should always remain vigilant and make sure that good governance is always practiced.
Dr. Domingo, do you have the same assessment? And what do you think the government can do better? Or what more can be done by way of preparedness in the short term and long term?
Right. One of the objective ways of comparing country performance across countries with regard to COVID-19 is the rate, or what they call the doubling time, like how many days before the number of confirmed cases doubles, or you can also look at how many days between the doubling of the number of deaths. Sa madaling salita, gaano kabilis tumaas yung number ng COVID cases tsaka yung mga namamatay. The trajectories show that we are right now still following the same speed that South Korea and what they call this Japan initially started with. Although in terms of sa dami ng araw, parang dumadating na tayo sa checkpoint na kung saan yung South Korea, who is said to be one of the better performing countries kasi talagang na-slow down nila yung spread sa kanila. Dumadating tayo sa point na malalaman natin, are we at par or are we better or worse? I wouldn't say that we can be better because let's be real about our capacities. We are not as highly resourced or rich. Hindi tayo kasing yaman ng South Korea. Pero hindi rin naman tayo kasing hirap or kasing delikado ng mga sinasabing weak health systems. To begin with, you don't really categorize countries as having strong, weak. Ang sinasabi lang is may mga bansa talaga na mas mahina yung capacities, but we make do with what we have. And in that sense, I do agree with what Jason said na this government of ours, no matter how we say that we criticize it, actually is adapting quite fast. Considering na para bang, I mean, look at the pace by which DOH, I don't know, maybe it's an effect of everyone being in quarantine and hyper vigilant on social media na as soon as a policy comes out within the next hour, meron na kagad criticism, and not just the criticism na para bang nagsasabi lang ng slogan. Hindi, there are really brilliant people who have all the time, probably in quarantine, to come up with the numbers and analytical figures that are actually driving the DOH to do much better than it would kung walang ganong hypervigilance. So the government overall is doing quite well. There will be some areas of improvement and we're seeing it. So when we say let's test more, sabi ng gobyerno, okay, we'll bring in more laboratories, we'll bring in more testing kits, and we'll train more people. And they're doing it as we speak. when we say let's count the number of ventilators and the number of beds, this is actually one of the interesting parang points. Dati, hirap na hirap mag-communicate ang public hospital tsaka ang private hospital. I mean, my career might be relatively young, but you can ask the more senior figures. They have never seen more close interactions between large private centers like Makati Medical, Medical City. These are the name brand private hospitals. And yet now they're openly communicating. Lumalabas yung talagang, well, I'll use the word, bayanihan across the sectors and across the hospitals. So overall, it's
Okay,
doing quite
I would
yeah, Dr.
maybe I would
Domingo,
add-
Ami's question, I think, as you did raise the point about country to country comparison, but as you raised the point about community based interventions, it as Dr. Ligot pointed out, it does inevitably raise the question of LGU to LGU comparisons. If we're going to go into community based interventions, how can we tell if one LGU is ready and another LGU is not? When can we confidently hand off certain responsibilities and certain tasks to our LGUs, whether that's on the level of a city or a municipality or a barangay?
right. This is where the DOH can come in. So LGUs are independent from each other. They have their own styles, but the DOH has the authority ever since, even before COVID, to prescribe standards and guidelines. So the DOH says this is the ideal. In fact, this is the only way because they issue licenses on how facilities should operate. In the time of COVID, DOH will also be the one leading what you call epidemiological surveillance units. There are regional epidemiology and surveillance units. So they call it RESU, merong PESU, which is at the province, letter P, merong MESU, and MySESU. Alam mo naman tayong Pinoy, marami tayong acronyms. But essentially, there is a DOH unit that handles
Okay.
epidemiology at the local level. Doon nila
Okay,
mabibigay
now
yung information.
Dr. Ligot, other than assessing the capacities of government officials and agencies, I know you're a behavioral change expert as well. What do we want to see on the members of that community? In other words, not just talking about our officials, but the residents of a certain community. What do you need to see in those residents to say that not just the officials, not just the bureaucracy, but even the people are ready to manage their own community?
Right. Actually, I was going to add earlier, Robbie. I think sometimes we have too much emphasis on what government can do, but this crisis is bigger than government. It's bigger than all of us, and it really requires a whole of society response, if you will, for us to overcome this crisis. And to answer your question, I would actually point to some very promising signs, even from the beginning. One of the advantages, if you can call it that, of living in the Philippines is that we're used to dealing with emergencies and calamities. This is not the first time, for example, that we've had to mobilize tremendous resources in response to a particular calamity. What that builds is a certain form of resilience and social capital, which is very evident in the first few weeks of the response. You see a flourishing of citizen-led movements, NGOs, civic groups, etc., self-organizing, self-governing, and really mobilizing support, not just for the front lines, but for the communities. That is the kind of community spirit that we need to see for this to work. And in relation to the actual management, I think one thing we have to emphasize here is the issue of stigma and whether or not, in the first instance, people feel that when they go to these community centers or when they subject themselves to these community guidelines, that they will feel better, that they will feel secure. That's very important to keep in mind. And government and different sectors of society have important roles in making sure that we're all reassured and that we all know that we have a role in this bigger response.
Dr. Ligot, people are saying after this pandemic, life on this planet will be different for good. What sound health measures do you think people should have, should develop as a result of this pandemic? Should we always be wearing masks, for example? Should we try to maintain social distancing after this threat is over?
Mm. Actually, I would say I think we really have to pause and reflect on the kind of life we want to see after all of this is said and done. And I cannot offer a clear prescription right now because the fact of the matter is, as Albert mentioned earlier, we're still not even the first peak of this epidemic. And in other countries like in China, they're already preparing for the second and third peak. So this response, although it feels like it's been so long, in truth we've only been responding to it as we have been for a little over 3 weeks. So how this will continue to evolve, how this will change our way of life, it still remains to be seen because actually there's still a lot of questions we need to answer in the first instance. However, having said that, I think there's a lot of talk and a lot of discussion right now about sustainability, about how we take care not just of ourselves but also of the environment around us. And this really, I think, this pandemic has really placed into unique focus just the interrelationships, not just between people but also between people and the bigger environment.
Dr. Domingo, you think we should continue washing our hands with alcohol, soap and water anywhere we go? I'm asking this because I know there are certain East Asian people who have been wearing masks wherever they go. And they've been doing this even years before this pandemic started. What healthy habits should we sustain even beyond this pandemic?
Yeah,
Right.
idadagdag ko lang doon, Dr. Albert, magkakamayan pa ba tayo, mga Pilipino? Maghilig mag-handshake, beso-beso.
Right.
We're a very
One of the I
very
saw on
social
Facebook
people.
that
What are
there's
the habits they think will change?
Yes, Dr. Domingo. Nawala yata si Dr. Domingo. Maybe Dr. Ligot can
Yeah,
answer that.
alam mo, Amy, that's a good question, no? And actually, a lot of this it's actually interesting. A lot of this classic public health advice about keeping your hands clean, coughing properly, it's not new. There was an old advertisement that was published sometime in the 1920s, in the aftermath of the 1918 flu, which it's interesting to observe that it's actually the same messages that we've been saying, we were saying right now. So I would say, as far as the basic hand hygiene, cough etiquette, etc., is concerned, we should continue to do that. That's just sound public health advice and just good healthy habits to begin with. To Robbie's question about whether or not we will get to a point where we will shake hands or embrace, etc., I certainly hope so because this physical distancing also has a toll on our mental health because we're used to touching or at least being close to other people, and this is really not, I would say, the normal state of affairs anyway for people. We will get to that, I believe so. I mean, there's the perspective that at some point we will build up enough immunity to this virus that we will be protected as a population. Of course, very early, it's still very early, but there's a lot of science and a lot of experiments being done already for possible vaccine treatments. So when all of that comes online, hopefully we might see, I wouldn't say we'll go back to normal, maybe a new normal, a better one.
Yeah.
Dr. Domingo, do you think we should maintain permanent quarantine areas so that in case something like this happens again, we won't overwhelm our hospitals and endanger too many of our health professionals?
Right. If there is one benefit that this COVID exercise, this pandemic rather, is giving us, it's preparing us. It's strengthening our health system, especially at the local level. Nakikita natin ngayon. I mean, the last time that you had me on this show, I was talking about universal healthcare. That was more than a year ago. And look at us now, we're talking about COVID, but the same principles apply. The coordination between levels of government, primary care above all, making sure that the front line is not only the hospital, but also the community. When we do set up those quarantine facilities, and as Jason already mentioned, we're not going to have just one peak. Until a vaccine comes, there will be multiple peaks in the pandemic. And the more that we are ready with the quarantine and isolation facilities at the community level, the more we will have have a better chance of surviving this and averting a lot of deaths. So yes, we should maintain it. I think even after, maybe some of these facilities might go back to what they used to be. Like I would imagine PICC will start hosting meetings again. Baka mas marami ng physical distancing and the sports arenas. But we should have the systems in place, and at a certain alarm, pag sinabing, okay, here comes another pandemic, another coronavirus or whatever in the future, sanay na tayo, meron na tayong mechanism, at hopefully, pag nangyari yon, mas mabilis na yung response natin.
What else can be done at the community level? We're talking now about isolation and community quarantine. We're talking about moving on beyond this enhanced community quarantine. What else can be done in the coming weeks?
In the coming weeks, the local governments will have to firm up the processes by which they deliver food and other assistance. When I say assistance, hindi lang po cash, okay? A lot of the economists, so I'm not an economist, but I'm interacting with a few, they're saying that the big side effect, in fact, comorbid nga tawag nila, kasabayang problema ng COVID is nag-slow down, nag-halt yung economy. So, karamihan ng mga isang kahig isang tuka, daily wage earners, talagang wala silang nakakain literally. So, now is the time, if government says stay in your houses, dapat ang response rin is dadalhan namin kayo ng pagkain. So, just stay inside para wag kayo mahawa, pero hahatiran namin kayo. And we're seeing LGU step up to that clamor.
Okay, unfortunately, we're running out of time. Once again, we'd like to thank Dr. Jason Ligot and Dr. Albert Domingo for joining us. I'm Robbie Elampay of One News.
I'm Ami Pamintuan of the Philippine Star.
Thank you, Robbie and Ami.
Thank you, Amy.
Maraming
Thank you,
salamat po.
Robbie.
Please keep safe.
Likewise. Good night.
Good night.